Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers and our special guest today, Rob Staton. And he is from the Seahawks Draft Blog.com. Started that blog about, at least 10 years ago, Rob, right? Welcome into the show. Here to talk Seahawks prospects in the draft coming up, to talk about maybe the Shane Waldron offensive coordinator hire that the Seahawks recently made. And then we'll get into all sorts of other little nooks and crannies of the Seahawks offseason as we progress. But welcome in, Rob. Thanks for joining us. What are you currently working on that might be of interest of everybody?
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. At the moment, I'm working on a lot of draft stuff, as you can imagine. We've kind of just had the Senior Bowl, so I'm focusing quite a bit on that and doing a few interviews. I've just interviewed a player called David Moore, who's a guard from Grambling State, who won the Offensive Lineman of the Week for the American team, as voted by the defensive lineman. Great to speak to him, a great character. Last week, I interviewed someone called Quinn Miners, who people may have seen him with the belly hanging out and the half shirt, and he made a lot of headlines at the Senior Bowl. And, I love speaking to the players. And, a year ago, I got a chance to interview Damian Lewis before the draft. And I really wanted to speak to one player the Seahawks drafted. And we managed to get one with Damian Lewis. And I'm hoping that one of these guys that I'm speaking to is going to make it as well. So interviews, podcast is going nicely on YouTube. And then, I started out as a Seahawks Draft Blog 12 years ago. And really, I didn't offer any opinions. I didn't write really about much at all. It was just a place where, look, if someone's done a mock draft like Mel Kiper, I'll put a link to it on the blog and you'll find it there and we can have a conversation about it. And then as time went by, I was trying to get into journalism at the time and I didn't know whether I was going to go into radio, TV, writing. So I started to write every day just to practice. And 12 years later, I'm still doing the blog for absolutely no financial benefit other than it's just a simple labor of love, which is amazing. And, I enjoy talking about the Seahawks. Over here in England, there's a few Seahawks fans, but you don't bump into many in the street to talk about the game at the weekend. So having my own little community to talk to every day is great.
Yeah, that's great. I used to be a part of the Seahawks.net community over with Todd Breida when he had that thing going in the early 2000s and towards about 2012. And met Keith online in the Seahawks Twitter community and through his writing over at the fan-sided blog that they were on. And Keith and I started this thing, it's 4 years ago, I think next week that we started the show. And we just do it for ourselves either. Doesn't make any money. We don't care. We just kind of put it out there. And it's fun for us to be able to get on and talk about the Seahawks and put it out there and hopefully people kind of come to it and enjoy it. So, Keith, how you doing?
I was saying when I retired from writing, I was I was so glad that I had this show to just stay involved and be able to talk Seahawks football with some friends and do that kind of stuff and I wouldn't trade this at all. So I hear you when it's talk about the labor of love and you just do it because you enjoy it and. That's what we're doing here. So, but thanks again for coming on. So let's set the stage for the draft before we start getting into prospects. So, Bill, why don't you go ahead and because I know you've got a list of different points here, and I
kind of wanted to start with the offensive coordinator hire for Seattle because the way that it would impact the offense, particularly Coach Pete Carroll came out after the season. Indicated that the big thing that they want to kind of work on and emphasize this year is improving the run game and upgrading along the offensive line. We've got a couple of free agents right now in Posick and Upati, who doesn't look like he would return. And so those are two holes that we would fill. The Shane Waldron hire kind of leads to the question, Rob, is that going to bring a different sort of offensive lineman, maybe something we used to see in the past, more athletic guys can get to the second level, that sort of thing. Is that something that Seahawk fans should look out for this offseason?
I think that potentially you could be looking at a combination of the two things. I mean, there are offensive linemen, and this is a very rich draft for offensive linemen, especially at guard and center, who are both very powerful, very big, and very athletic. You've got a guy like Ben Cleveland at Georgia, for example, who he's about 350 pounds. He would have probably broken the bench press record at the combine this year if it was going ahead, but he runs a 5.00 at 350 pounds. So, he can probably do a bit of the two sort of different things. And I think it is going to be, I think the whole appointment is a meshing of ideas. It is Pete Carroll giving a bit of ground, I think, to Russell Wilson and saying, look, Russell, I hear you. I know what kind of offense you want to run. Equally, the Rams system has created very good running games, and it is a feature of what they do. So I think that appeases Pete Carroll as well. And I think the other thing you've got to, you maybe will see some athleticism on the offensive line, but you've also still got Mike Solari still there, who prefers those bigger, physical, mauling offensive linemen. He is still going to be the offensive line coach as of today. I mean, there's not been any announcement there that he's moving on. So, and the other thing you've got to remember here is they're committed to Brandon Shell, they're committed to Damian Lewis, who they've only just drafted, and they're committed to Dwayne Brown. So unless they're going to move those three guys out and replace them with different offensive linemen, I don't think there's going to be a sea change. So what I think they're probably going to do is look for big, athletic, interior offensive linemen. And fortunately, as I mentioned, this is the ideal draft to do it.
Now, you had mentioned that you recently interviewed Quinn Miners, the offensive center and guard from Wisconsin Whitewater. I hadn't really heard of Quinn before the Senior Bowl. Obviously, he made his presence very well known there. What did you think of him during the interview process, and what attracted you to engage in that interview to begin with?
I think the first thing that really was just how he performed. He went to the Senior Bowl, and I don't think anybody was talking about Quinn Miners. He wasn't being discussed by anybody, and no one had really watched his tape. I don't even know if you can get hold of Wisconsin Whitewater tape quite readily on YouTube, which is where most people get it these days. So he came in as an unknown, and here's this guy, and he's kind of got the shirt rocking there, and the belly's hanging out, and as he liked to put it in the interview, he likes to get a bit of air on the belly. I don't know how that helps, but it's presumably quite warm some of the time in Alabama. I don't think it is in Mobile at the moment, but whatever works for him. And you just sort of noticed him on the field straight away because of the appearance. And then here was this guy who was taking on, the best defensive lineman at the Senior Bowl, and, not just winning those reps, but dominating the reps, burying people like Patrick Jones when he was lining up at right guard, and, handling some of these big, physical interior defensive lineman at center. He'd never played center before. He was a left guard in college, and here he was. He looks like
Wow.
He's basically, if you type the stats into a machine and you say, I want a center, please, and it comes out the conveyor belt, it's a Quinn Miners. So he really looks the part. And I wanted to interview him, and it was such a breath of fresh air to speak to him, actually, because he was such a really just an engaging person. I did say to him at the end, look, I'm a Seahawks fan, just saying, I didn't put this in the interview, but I really, I'd be quite keen on them to have a dabble there and maybe take you. And he was saying, I'd be very interested in playing for the Seahawks and for Russell Wilson, of course, the Wisconsin connection. So, although it's a different school. So I think he's, that is somebody who I just think that he would appeal to the Seahawks. You're talking about a 320-pound, 6'3" offensive lineman who has got the arm length at the 33-inch arms, and he's very athletic. He can dunk a basketball at 320 pounds. So he's got the explosive traits, he's got the size, he's got the feet and the agility. I'd be very surprised if the Seahawks weren't taking a good long look at him during this process.
So when before the Senior Bowl, where would it have been likely that he may have gone in the draft? And after the Senior Bowl, now that he's got all the attention on him, teams are paying more closer attention, looking at all the film, breaking it down, probably inviting him to interviews, at least Zoom interviews. Where do you think he might end up?
I think maybe within the league, they perhaps knew about him a bit more than the media. So I would have suggested he probably would have been drafted. Maybe he would have, a tentative grade of 5th round. You're never quite sure with these small school guys. It's one thing to impress at that level, but you want to see them do it at a Senior Bowl. Now, leaving the Senior Bowl, he's a top 100 pick. Now, I would put him in the back end of round 2 in the same range that Ali Marpet went. Ali Marpet's just won the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. was at Hobart, had a great Senior Bowl, tested very well at the Combine, ended up going in the late second round. I think it was pick 61. So I think that is the kind of range where Miners is. Maybe he goes in the early part of round 3, but he's squarely in that day 2 mix now. And listen, in a weird draft when people don't have as much information as they would have had in the past, who's to say a guy like that who absolutely lit up the Senior Bowl won't go a bit earlier than we all thought he would have done a few weeks ago.
So before we get into a lot of other prospects, and Keith, I know that you had some more offensive line guys. Let's get into our own free agents really quick, and maybe a little bit of the salary cap conversation before we dive headfirst into the remaining guys coming up into the draft. We have a lot of holes right now. The cap space is fairly limited. We do have some opportunity to probably increase that with a number of different moves, extensions, restructures, releases, trades, etc. You've got a couple of running backs, our number 1, number 2, Carson and Hyde, Hollister at tight end, Olsen's retired, Dorsett and Moore. Dorsett didn't have an opportunity to really show us anything. Team says they might want him back. Who knows? David Moore, Upati, Buahe at guard, Ethan Posick at center, KJ Wright at linebacker, Bruce Irvin, Mayoa, Dunbar, Griffin. There's a lot of need out there right now. Very little cap. Something seems like it's got to give. Rob, what do you think? I mean, you take a look at the salary cap this year. It's pretty tight. Next year, it's pretty wide open. I think they've got $140 million in cap space. Is there any opportunities there to leverage some of that future space with some of the existing players?
Absolutely, that is possible, and I do think you have to be a little bit careful with that, because that sort of it's with, yes, they have a lot of money for next year, so it's $118.5 million that at the moment they have for effective cap space, which it includes once your practice squad and your injured reserve money comes off. Essentially, this is what in a draft class, this is what you're left with. It's about 118 million that they would have to spend in 2022. Here's the problem though. They only have 19 players contracted for 2022, which means that you're going to have to sign, 70 players, and the cap takes into account, I think, the top 51. So, a lot of that money will go quickly once you start adding players who are contracted, and you'll find that 118 is a little bit of a mirage at the moment. And it's the same this year. You've got 48 players signed up. Quite a lot of those are futures contract players who they're fringe players that you maybe give them a camp. They might not even make it to camp. So you've got a lot of holes that you have to fill. At the moment, they have about $2 million to spend in effective cap space. That isn't even enough to give Poona Ford a second round tender at this point, which is what they're going to give him. So you can't even pay Poona Ford for his extra year as a former undrafted free agent, let alone replacing or re-signing Carson, Hyde, Griffin, the 2 tight ends that you mentioned, Ethan Posick, the whole Benson Mayoa, all of the players that you mentioned already. So something's got to give. They've got to make a decision here, and they can't raise $25 million by tweaking Russell's contract and extending Carlos Dunlap and Jaron Reed. It's going to take something a bit more significant, I feel, than that if the Seahawks really want to have a proper off-season, because they don't even have the draft picks to say, well, it's okay because we can fill that hole with a third rounder, we can fill that hole with a first rounder. Something's got to give here, and I think over the next few weeks I think something reasonably sized will have to happen, and the debate for me that is worth having right now is, what is that going to be?
Well, I think before that, you look at the teams, like where they are. The Seahawks are right in the middle. That $2 million is literally right in the middle of the entire league. There's 17 better and do the math, 15 lower, and or I guess it's 14 lower, but whatever. But they're right in the middle of the league. You've got half the league that's underwater right now. The Saints are $100 million underwater. And you have the cap going down for 1 year and then rebounding back up above where it was a year from now. So this all sounds to me like the PA and the league are going to get together and say, hey, let's take that growth in year 2 and spread it out. and not have the salary cap go down. And the Seahawks are going to just randomly, along with every other team, be gifted $20 million in extra salary cap money when they change the number from 178 back to 198 like it was this season. And when that happens, I think that completely changes the entire discussion that we're having. And so I have a hard time engaging too strongly in these, scenarios like Jason LaCanfora's article yesterday saying, that teams are calling about Russell Wilson and moving him. And I was like, why would you do that? Relief is coming because the entire league needs it. So.
Well, I think the what I would say is that there was a report yesterday that the cap is going. I mean, this was out from Adam Schefter, that the cap will be between 180 and 181 million, which is about 3 million more than they were initially projecting. I think the problem that the NFL has got is that it's. I mean, I've thought for a while that there needs to be some kind of a solution here. One of the things I was talking about during the season was maybe the league has to say for 1 year, your highest paid player, for example, doesn't count against the cap. So essentially everybody gets a relief for their quarterback, and if it's not a quarterback, and let's put it this way, if you're not paying a quarterback, suddenly you might be able to sign a big free agent and give him a lot of money, and you get that as a bonus. And it's just to encourage the money to flow, and for the veterans to still get their money and to provide some relief. I thought something like that would happen. It hasn't happened yet. So that was an idea, and no one's even talking about that idea. I've not looked into it enough to know whether it's feasible or not, but they're sort of saying it's 180 million. And I think the problem with that, nobody really knows what the growth is exactly going to be next year. If you have to have another season, for example, with no fans in the stadiums, let's really hope that is not a possibility, but we just don't know. I mean, I think if you'd have said it, 8 months ago, are we still going to be really stuck in the situation we are with a global pandemic? It would have been really disappointing. And if you get to September and there still aren't fans in the stadium, or if you play a full season with 20% attendances or 30, then there's not going to be that growth again next year. So if you borrow from next year and put it into this year, you might just find that next year you need to borrow even more from the future, and the league goes out of business. So it's a really concerning. I don't know what the league's going to do. I don't know if there are half the league is like you say, in a really difficult position. What I will say is that some of these teams that are in a lot of problems. So just to give you an example, the Packers are 28 million over the cap, but they've got 63 contracted players, and they've got players without dead cap hits who they can release somewhat easily or trade and get their cap down. They're in sort of the reverse of the Seahawks. The Seahawks have got to sign players to fill their holes in order to get their numbers up. They're only paying at the moment probably about 37 players who you're realistically going to make the roster. So they've got a lot more work to do than some of the teams beneath them. So they are in the middle of the pack. But in reality, some of those teams who've got 60, 65 players contracted are probably a little closer to the middle in reality than maybe the Seahawks are. So it is a huge issue for the teams. I don't know how they're going to do it. I think that the whole league is in a really serious financial state that people perhaps don't recognize. And I don't know what the answer is.
Well, they do have their TV and media contracts are coming up for renewal starting in 2022. They've talked about starting those renegotiations early, and maybe doing kind of a quote unquote extension of current contracts that would bump those up into the stratosphere and add tons of money into the league. That's where, they're projecting the $220 million cap in 2022, the $250 million cap in 2023, at least according to Over the Cap. That might be an area where they know eventually relief is coming, and they might feel more comfortable, keeping the cap somewhat even this year. Even 190, 195 would help. Keep it at 195 instead of 220 in 2022, and that would help bridge that gap, and then you can move on to normal quote unquote growth back in 2023. So we'll see. I think you're right, Rob. It is pretty volatile. There's a lot of unknowns. Maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we should be hearing a lot of information when they had their league meetings before the official league start date in mid-March. So we should have an answer definitely by then. So maybe or maybe not. Keith, why don't you decide? We can talk about what we can do with the cap, or we can just move straight on into.
Let's talk about the draft, because we got Rob here.
I agree,
and that's his wheelhouse.
Let's do that.
Can I just say one last thing on this though before we move on? Of
course.
And really, for me, the thing about the Seahawks is not so much the lack of money that bothers me more than anything else. It's about where you spend your money that I think is the dilemma that is facing the Seahawks here. Because if you look at the resource they've spent on the linebacker and the safety positions, it's quite a lot. I mean, last year they were paying Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright $25 million combined. They spent a first round pick on a linebacker. The year before they traded up in round 3 for Cody Barton. That is quite an incredible amount of picks and money invested in the linebacker position. And then when you think about the safety position, second round pick on Marquise Blair, a fifth round pick on Quandre Diggs, and you inherit his contract from Detroit. And then you spend 2 first round picks and a third for Jamal Adams and a fourth rounder. And if you want to have Jamal Adams for the next few years, he's going to cost you a record breaking safety contract. To have all of that money and picks and resource in those 2 positions, and to struggle to, really struggle in the trenches late in the season, losing the New York game because you got whipped up front, and then getting back and then losing in the playoffs, in part because of your inability to adjust, but also in part because you were beaten in the trenches on both sides of the ball by the Rams. For me, it's what the Seahawks need to do is be really honest about where should we be spending perhaps less money and where should we be spending more. And I'd like to transfer some of those picks and that money from linebacker and safety into the offensive line and the defensive line. And I think that is the challenge that the Seahawks face. And for me, I hope that they do that this year.
I mean, that definitely does sound like a sound argument and reasoning, Rob. But what do? You've got Bobby Wagner for another couple of years, short of a blockbuster trade for Bobby to get picks back or a player in picks. You're going to have that cap hit, and you're going to be investing in that for at least 2 more years. You've got KJ Wright, who's a free agent. There's a lot of sentiment that folks want to bring KJ Wright back for a couple of years and give him, maybe not what he was making last year, but a $6-7 million deal per year. And then the Jamal Adams thing, that's tough. I mean, Keith and I have gone round and around about Jamal Adams and whether we should trade or not. Whether we should keep him, there's the argument on Keith's side, and I'll let him articulate if I don't do a good job. But he's a bit, he's a player that tilts the field, and that's what we're lacking on defense. We've got Bobby Wagner, and then what? That's it. Mm-hmm. That's what Adams was brought in to do, to be a game changer and a playmaker, and he proved that he could do that. But he does come from that safety position. But he showed he could get to the quarterback. Now, granted, they schemed that thing and whatever, but nonetheless, you're right. We're about to come to the decision day where we have to invest $17 million per year with tons of guaranteed money on a player that plays with reckless abandon. I'm kind of worried a little bit about maybe some injuries coming with that big contract. And you're right. The trenches. I mean, I see it, Keith. You're an offensive line guy. You see it. You see the lack of investment in that. Although we've made some picks over time, it just seems like it's always just been not quite enough. And then the defensive line, the first part of this last season really showed the weaknesses that we did have there. Carlos Dunlap was able to come in and kind of help that, make players around him better, and that really did help. But I agree that the trench investment is lacking, and we are investing in other areas, and I don't see any end to that or an easy way out per se.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think goes into this, and I completely agree. Like the Seahawks lack of willingness to invest in the offensive line during the Pete Carroll era has been really frustrating for me. But when we start talking about the cap stuff, the 2 of the names that come to mind and people that might be jettisoned to create the extra cap room are Dunlap and Jerron Reed. And then you're like, okay, but they were probably, other than Poona Ford, your best 2 defensive linemen. And so now you have to replace them too. And so now you're just shifting even more of the financial burden off of the trenches, which is where you were weak. And so it's like, okay, I agree with you. There needs to be some evaluation as far as what's going on there. And I want to see more investment in the offensive line. I think you look at yesterday's game and the Super Bowl and just how awful the Chiefs line was with all their, backups in there and whatnot. And even having, a superstar quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, it didn't matter because he was constantly running for his life. And it was like, hey, look, that's like watching the Seahawks play. It just, the talent around him out of wide receiver didn't matter because he never had time to, do anything with it. And it was it definitely showed that it pays to invest in there. And I kind of hope that, that Pete Carroll's comments equate to, hey, we're going to upgrade left guard. We're going to look at upgrading center. Maybe we'll move on from Shell and upgrade at right tackle, or find a left tackle of the future that can start in a year because Brown's 36 and, maybe might be near the end of, with that. And there's a need to just get that set and get it right. And right now I'm worried for Russell Wilson because they haven't managed to do it in years.
Well, let's talk about the Seahawks draft capital this year. That kind of leads right into that, investing into the line with cheap talent, quality upcoming talent. Seahawks do not have their first round pick in the Adams trade. They've got the second round pick, 55, 56 overall. No third round pick goes to the Adams trade. They've got a fourth round pick, 124 overall, fifth round pick, 163 overall, seventh round pick, presumably the Seahawks didn't, or the Perry Nickerson trade didn't meet the conditional trade there. And so they have that. So they've got 4 picks, second, fourth, fifth, seventh round. Dwayne Brown's getting older. He's got a big contract. There's really no way to invest in an immediate starter at that position. They would have to have somebody come in and develop in that spot if they were to draft somebody. Rob, question for you. Based on the amount of draft capital that we do have, and the needs that we have, and some of those needs are going to be met in free agency, but where do you see them? What is the offseason strategy for John Schneider this year, a guy that really likes to accumulate picks and spread them out throughout the draft, has very little draft capital to do so this year?
I think his number one priority is going to be to get back in this draft. I think he has to find a way over the next few weeks to get more picks because, as we've talked about, there are a lot of holes. And if you want to be able to sign players, you are going to have to find some cheap talent. You're going to, how useful was it to have Damian Lewis, for example, playing the way that he did for $1 million, last year? And that's the kind of picks you've got to go and that's what the draft is about, really. It's about, not every player can be Russell Wilson, Dwayne Brown. Some of these guys are going to have to be young. They're going to have to start quickly, and they're going to have to do a job for you. Damian Lewis wasn't flawless, but he was perfectly good as a starting right guard. And part of the problem the Seahawks have got with this draft capital now is that, to me, it's kind of they've spent. It comes back to the point I made earlier. So how do you justify keeping, for example, Wagner and Wright, while spending a first round pick on a linebacker? If you draft a center last year, then that's a hole filled for now, even if they don't start necessarily in 2020. You're planning ahead. It's one less hole to fill now if you retain Wagner. If you bring back KJ Wright, you've got a center. Okay, that's that need addressed. Or if they'd have drafted Jonathan Taylor or somebody, you're saying, okay, they can move on from Chris Carson. They've got Jonathan Taylor for $1.5 million this year. There was no real planning. You've kind of spent picks, and then you've spent more picks at the same position. So it's, we spend all the money on linebacker, and then we get draft another linebacker. We draft Marquise Blair, then we go and trade 2 first-round picks for Jamal Adams, and you have all this stock tied up, and then you have the holes sort of dotted around that you're now trying to fill, and you simply cannot draft a starting quarterback, draft a starting running back, draft a starting Sam linebacker, draft a center, draft a left guard, with 4 picks. And if you trade down from 56 and you know, what are you going to get? You know, a 5th round pick, maybe a 4th round pick if you go down far enough, and then you don't pick until the 75th pick in the draft, and you nearly get in towards being completely out of the top 100 at that point. You are really restricted. So I think what John is going to have to do is he's going to, again, have to be really honest about what is the makeup of this team. And I've been writing, and I hope that they feel this way, is they just go back to what they did when they first came in, which was 2010. First pick was a left tackle, it was Russell Okung. Their first pick in 2011 was James Carpenter. They signed Robert Galloway. It didn't work out, but you could see the thought process there. They traded for Marshawn Lynch and got a fantastic running back. There was so much care and attention and investment into the identity of what they wanted to be. And by 2013, they'd got the most expensive offensive line in the NFL when they won the Super Bowl. And I'd quite like to see a return to that approach. And I think that would help Russell Wilson, because you run the ball better, you protect him better. And the one thing they also had in 2012, 2013 was a young, fast, angry defense. Cheap as well. You know, a lot of those guys were drafted later on. And while I understand the need for field tilters, that's obviously a big thing. I also think you can find players in free agency. I mean, like Shaquille Barrett, who, just for the books, he cost $4 million last year, you know, as a free agent. JPP's $12.5 million. I mean, it's less than Dunlap's going to be next year.
Well, let me ask you this,
guys.
Well, let me ask you this, Rob. So in the last 4 years, the Seahawks have been at 9 wins, 10, 11, and now 12. Are you advocating for kind of resetting this thing again as they did in 2017-18? Or are you trying to just do this incrementally, strategically, in certain spots and areas to keep the window open for Russell Wilson and kind of keep what's working towards the end of the year? The defense seemed to be working fairly well. The offense sputtered, but at least the pieces are still there to kind of put it together, maybe with the new offensive coordinator. How do you see that all kind of meshing in the way that your vision sees it?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because a reset, it's a dangerous word, I suppose, because it makes it sound like you're blowing everything up. And
yes, right.
I don't think it's a case of blowing everything up and saying we've got to start from scratch and this is a 3-year build. I think it's more a case of just reorganizing your finances a little bit and finding the way to create a formula that will enable you to take the next step when it matters, which is the postseason. Because while they have been improving, personally, I think they had a pretty comfortable schedule this year. And I do wonder a little bit how much the defensive upturn was down to hardly a murderer's row of quarterbacks they faced. But they've won one game in the playoffs in 4 years. And for me, I kind of feel like in 5 years' time, do I want to look back on sort of this period and think, I wish they'd have just, built Russell a great O-line, or just changed a few different things and maybe made a couple of tough decisions in order to get that next step and try something different, than us be sat here in another 3-4 years and they may well have won a game against the NFC East in the wild card round, but then lost at Lambeau again, or lost to the NFC South team that's won the division, or you see what I mean? Just going through the same pattern every single season.
Well, one last question before we get to the prospects. Promise. Are you advocating possibly for a big move, like trading for like a Wagner for picks, or a Jamal Adams for picks, or entertaining the idea of moving a Russell Wilson for a load of picks? What is it exactly that you're saying?
Well, I wouldn't trade Russell Wilson, because I think we're seeing right now that the league is scrambling around trying to find can I trade for a Kirk Cousins? Can I trade for a Carson Wentz? Can I trade for Derek Carr? It's you don't want to join those teams who are suddenly looking for a mediocre quarterback who's just not a rookie to hold the fort for a while. So I certainly wouldn't advocate that. But I think what I'd like to see is a real commitment that, look, you're paying Russell $35 million a year. Let's make Russell's life as easy as possible and truly make him the focal point of the team and say, let's give him a really excellent O-line. You know, I'd like to target a top 10 O-line for next year, you know, really good, consistently good O-line in the mold of like the Cleveland Browns O-line, which is a mix of picks and big free agent signings and investment. I'd like to see them try to create a running game as effective as Cleveland's, and potentially get Russell another weapon. Now, these things are all going to cost serious money, but I think if you did that and it didn't work, then at least you can say you gave it your best shot with a $35 million superstar quarterback. And I personally would rather do that than as trot out another $2 million left guard, a rookie center, and the next Carlos Hyde at running back, and the next Philip Dorsett. But hey, we have Bobby and Jamal, and Bobby's great. Please don't anybody see this as disrespect to Bobby Wagner. I love Bobby Wagner as much as everybody else. I just don't personally know whether he's worth $17 million this year and $20 million next, which is what he's going to cost. And for Jamal Adams, again, it's not that I think Jamal Adams is a bad player. I don't think he's a particularly great scheme fit in Seattle, but I don't want to pay him 18 million, 19 million, 20 million a year from 2022. I would rather spend that money elsewhere. That's just me.
Well, and I think all of this bringing it back to the draft, the last time the Seahawks were really short on draft capital, going into an offseason, they traded Frank Clark and got, that first round pick, and then was able to use that draft capital to move back a couple times, and they went from 6 picks to 11. And they did that by trading Frank Clark. Now they have 4 picks. The history does tell us that trading a name to get some draft capital and give Schneider some ammunition to work with in the draft makes a lot of sense, and it makes a plan for what they're planning on doing. And the fact that they drafted Brooks in the first round last year, he's a middle linebacker. He is clearly the heir apparent at middle linebacker. You need the cap space. You need the draft capital. Bobby Wagner's sitting there. He's never going to be worth more in terms of a trade than he is right now, because as he continues to age, his value is going to go down. So now would be the time to do it if you're ever going to.
And with regards to Jamal Adams, and we've talked about this several times, Keith, but with those that are saying, Jamal is probably only going to get paid $14.5–15 million or whatever. I don't think so. I mean, there's like 6 or 7 safeties hitting the market this year in free agency that are going to get money, going to get paid a lot of money. And Jamal Adams wants to get paid higher than any one of those guys that is going to get a new free agent contract this year. John Johnson's probably looking at $13 million per year. Marcus May, there at the Jets, going to look at about $15 million. Marcus Williams, previously with the Saints probably won't re-sign him, but he's going to get paid from somewhere. He's going to make about $14 million. Anthony Harris, Minnesota, he's going to get money. Justin Simmons is probably going to get paid the most money out of all those guys. He's probably he wants $16 million, 16 and a half.
Yeah, but
Adams wants to get $17.5 million. I guarantee it.
How many teams have the cap space and willingness to pay a safety? There's not a lot. Those guys may want that, but they're not going to get it this offseason. It's not, the money's not there.
Respectfully, I disagree, but I hear your argument.
Half the teams in the league have negative cap space right now. And I just don't see, with that many players hitting the open market, that means teams have options. That's a buyer's market. I just don't see it going that way.
A quick point on that, though. Some of the teams who actually have the most cap space, for example, the Patriots, they run systems with hybrid safeties, and Marcus May, Simmons would be great there. They've got $63 million to spend. The Dolphins have got $28 million to spend. They equally run the Belichick scheme. There are teams like the Browns who are desperate for a playmaker in the secondary who've got $22 million to spend. So although it's true there's a lack of money, it's actually the safety market and the cornerback market, it could actually stay fairly somewhat strong, just because there are just a handful of teams. The Jets are another one. I mean, they may well, if I was the Jets, I'd pay to keep Marcus May with your $70 million that you've got. So there are some teams that and some of those guys will be franchised as well. So there are some teams who could potentially be in that market.
All right, let's put this. Yeah, put that all to bed. Let's talk about prospects.
It's been a fun discussion, but we've got the draft guy here. Let's talk some prospects.
So let's start with the offensive line, and why don't you go with any?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the offensive line, and this seems to be a pretty deep class, especially on the interior. The Seahawks need a left guard. They need a center. So there's a lot of good names. But what intrigues me is, hey, can we find a tackle? Because, Shell was serviceable. He played pretty well in the first half of the year and then got hurt, missed some time. When he came back, he wasn't as good. But, it's a reasonable contract. If we can get rid of that and bring in a rookie with more talent and possibly a left tackle of the future, I'd love to see them do that. But is that possible? And so I'm looking through, and I just wanted to get your take on a couple of guys like Walker Little from Stanford, 6'7", 320. He's Stanford, so he's coached well. But is there anything there that makes you think that he might progress at the next level to become a genuine NFL starter?
Yes, absolutely. Walker Little. If I would recommend people go and watch the Rivals recruiting videos of Walker Little when he was coming through the ranks as a 5-star recruit, and you will see a player that is a very natural left tackle. I mean, his frame, his balance, his agility, his footwork, even at that age, he just looked like the real deal. And there's been a lot of expectation around Walker Little. A couple of years ago, he was being talked about as a first-round pick. He chose to come back to school, then he got hurt. Then he sat out this season, having got hurt. He didn't want to go into the draft last year off the back of an ACL injury. So he then comes back, and then there's a global pandemic. So we've not seen him for a couple of years. So we have to bear that in mind, and that could impact his stock. But we are talking about a player who, without any of that, probably would have been a top 15 pick. He's got everything, the length, the size, the athleticism to be a fantastic left tackle. I mean, personally, I think there's just such a demand on left tackles. I know a lot of people can have him in that second and third round range. I've been putting him in the top 15 because I still think that when push comes to shove, teams will go, we'll take a chance on Walker Little, because it's not a particularly top heavy draft. There's going to be a huge, I think once you get to sort of pick 8 even, you're going to maybe see a few surprises, because teams are going to have, the guy who's probably going to go 12 may have a similar grade to the guy who's going to go 30. So it's kind of pick your poison at that point. And I could see someone like Walker Little going a lot earlier than people think. But if he was there for the Seahawks, he would be a fine investment, because he's definitely got what it takes.
Yeah, because that's what, with him not playing, and you haven't seen him, you don't know what he's doing, you don't know, they're not going to be able to work him out. There's no combine to see where he is in terms of that stuff. I can see what you're saying with the top 15 pick. I mean, the talent was there, but I guess it only takes one team to take the risk and go for it, for him to come off the board. But I was hoping you're gonna be like, oh yeah, we haven't seen him. No team's taking him. He'll be there, sitting there when the Seahawks pick in the 50s. And I'd be like, okay, good. Then I know what I'm mocking to the Seahawks for the rest of the offseason. But no, so you're being too smart here and telling me the truth instead of what I want to hear, and I love it. So okay, so if without, who would be another guy that has that left tackle talent, but maybe needs to develop? So he's not ready to start at left tackle year one because you've got Dwayne Brown, but he'll be ready in 2022. Who else is in that range that might be available in the 50s or 60s? Is there anyone?
Well, I think that one player who's really risen as a consequence of the Senior Bowl is a guy called Dante Smith. Now, he is from East Carolina. He's 295 pounds. So you're not talking about a guy who is ready-made to start in the NFL. He's going to need to at least add 10 pounds. And when you look at his frame, he can certainly do that. He doesn't look filled out at 290. He doesn't look like a tight end masquerading as a left tackle. What he has is just an incredible frame, 6'5", 35 and a quarter inch arms, an 85 inch wingspan. That is left tackle length. And then when you watch him in the Senior Bowl, there was two things that he did really well. First of all, he brought some real attitude. So this is a small school guy who turns up and he doesn't take any crap from any of the big school guys, handled them really well, very physical. And the other thing was just, his balance, he wasn't mixing his feet up. His technique was fairly good. He got his hands inside. If people were attacking him off the edge, he would shut them down. You saw some of the big name defensive linemen get really frustrated going up against him because he was shutting them down. They weren't getting any easy wins with him. No one was bending the arc and getting around there and getting to the quarterback against him. So I thought there was definitely something there. And he's a guy who's probably gone from a day 3 pick now to, I think, round 2 or round 3. Now, whether you want to take, such a project, someone who's probably not going to be, he may play George Fant for a year, but is really that's the only bang you're going to get for your buck in year 1. That's a decision to make depending on how many picks you actually have in this draft. If you only have 4, you may need to look at a left guard instead, or a center, or a different position. But if you have maybe a few more, whether it's 56 or a pick in round 3, I think there's something that there's just enough to work with there that you think this guy's got something. And with a year or 2 of tutoring from Dwayne Brown, maybe he could be onto something and could be a really good player one day.
Let's stick with tackle.
I love those picks.
Yeah, let's stick with tackle for a second. Maybe look to the mid-round area where Seattle has 4th and 5th round picks. A guy like James Hudson, possibly as a developmental kind of tackle, or maybe an Arlick Jackson. I was just wanted to pique your thoughts on that real quick, Rob.
Sadly, those 2 guys, they don't pass the arm length test. They're both in the 32-inch range. And, what we've been able to do over the years, mainly thanks to my very patient wife who allows me to spend so much time doing this, is sort of go and have a look at who they've drafted, consistently over the years. And there's only really one offensive lineman they've taken with sub 33-inch arms. That was Joey Hunt in round 6 a few years ago. And we're talking about a round 6 flyer. We like the guy. We'll give him a shot. When the Seahawks are always willing to overlook something. I mean, I don't think their ideal quarterback was 5'10", but if a player excels, and then maybe they go that way. But generally speaking, for interior offensive linemen and for defensive linemen, you're talking 33 inches. And for the tackles, you've got to talk about the great length, 34-inch arms, 35-inch arms, maybe even 36. There are the occasional player that has 36-inch arms, these huge vines, just to get out there. And that length is so important when you're defending the edge and you're trying to latch onto people, keep your frame clean, kick slide, even if it's just to ward them off and just to keep the path and make the arc as long as possible to the quarterback, you've got to have that length. And we were seeing it at the Senior Bowl. The guys with the shorter arms, you can get into their frame, you're going to push-pull, you can get around them very easily, you can one-out, you can stiff-arm them, straight-arm them to get around them. And it's a real issue. And sadly for those 2 guys, they both have short arms. They're probably going to have to kick inside to guard.
Well, speaking of, let's talk interior players. Posic's a free agent. Potty's probably gone. We're looking to upgrade those areas. Keith mentioned last week in the show that the team may consider keeping Posic just from an athletic profile with the new offensive coordinator being able to get to the 2nd level. They might consider keeping him around on a less expensive deal and focusing the upgrade onto the left guard position. Looking to the draft, centers and guards, throughout the draft, early and then later, what are some of the prospects that might fit?
Well, in terms of centers and guards, there's a whole host. I mean, there's a long list of players who could really appeal. Again, I like to sort of see which are the ones that are most likely to land in Seattle based on what they've done in the past, which sadly means that players like, there are 2 great centers in this draft. Creed Humphrey's one of them, very technically adept, strong, combo blocks very well, gets to the 2nd level very well, but he has short arms again. And it makes you pause for a moment. I'm not saying the Seahawks won't draft him, but history tells us that it's less likely than some other guys. And Landon Dickerson is in the same situation, I'm afraid. They're both in the 32-inch arm range. Dickerson has got injuries. I'm not sure that they'll be willing to take a chance on someone like Dickerson after the Darrell Taylor situation this year, because Dickerson's career has just been filled with one injury after another, I'm afraid, even though he's a really good player. We've talked about Quinn Miners as a potential center or guard. He's a very good option. Some of the other players to look at, I mentioned him earlier, Ben Cleveland, would run a 5.00 if there was a combine. He was 354 pounds, got the 33-inch.
That's crazy.
6'6". He's so strong. And do you know what's great thing about watching Ben Cleveland is that I would urge everybody to go and watch the Auburn-Georgia game. from 2020. Go and watch the Auburn-Georgia game and watch Ben Cleveland playing right guard and just watch. We're not talking about a small school. We're talking about Auburn defensive linemen getting so frustrated. You can see them physically just wanting to give up, throwing their arms up in the air because they just can't get around this guy. He's just bullying them. He's just beating them up. And they're getting frustrated. They don't know what to do. He latches on and he handles them. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, this is what they need. This is what the Seahawks need. And I think his athleticism is actually, if you go on the internet and you read what people say about Ben Cleveland, they go, he's not much of an athlete. He's just a mauler in a phone booth. But then if you actually watch the tape, he can progress to the second level. There was one block against Auburn where he's at right guard and the center kicks out to the second level and he has to come across and take on the nose. Now, that's not an easy move to make in such it's snap, gone, you're across. And he did it and got in front of the center quickly and got leverage and drove him up and drove him off the ball. The running back goes behind him for a first down on 2nd and 4. And I'm thinking, where's the athleticism problem here? I don't know why people are saying that he's a 6th round lumbering guard. Then maybe he's had some academic issues at Georgia, but he's a football player. He's not going to have to do math in the next level. It's kind of like the only math he needs to do is the numbers on the defenders that he needs to go and block. So I like Ben Cleveland and I'd be willing to take a shot on him, any day. And then, a few more names quickly just to throw out there. Now I'm just sort of loading out names. Aaron Banks at Notre Dame had a really good year for them. He's huge, 6'5", 308 pounds, 338 pounds, 33 and an eighth inch arms. He played a little bit of left tackle when Eichenberg had to leave the game in one of their games. I think it was against Florida State. He moves out to left. He's not a left tackle, but he filled in there for a bit. Didn't embarrass himself. Drives people off the ball. Gets to the second level. Can maul. And then you've got Alex Leatherwood. Now, Alex Leatherwood went to the Senior Bowl to play tackle and said, I'm not playing anything other than tackle. I'm not coming otherwise. And in the game, he was very good, which is what he looks very good for Alabama. But in the 1v1s, he showed some limitations as a tackle. I think he's going to kick inside. But if you want somebody potentially who could start out at left guard and then maybe, I don't think he's ever going to be quick and he's never going to be, one of those really athletic, mobile, someone trades 2 first-round picks from down the road, Laramie Tunsil type athlete. But if you want a left tackle who can maybe get the job done in the running game and do a decent job in pass protection, then maybe Leatherwood could kick out to left tackle one day. But I think he'd be a really good left guard.
So before we move off of offensive line, there's one other name I wanted to get your opinion on, and my guess is you're probably going to tell me he's got short arms, but that would be Josh Myers from Ohio State.
I don't know the measurements for Josh Myers because he didn't measure at the Senior Bowl, but I really like Josh Myers. Very athletic center. He tested very well at Spark when he was at high school. I thought he was just Mr. Consistency watching. I mean, Ohio State didn't play many games in 2020, but he was Mr. Consistency. And when you watch the Clemson game in the semifinal, he and the right guard, who's probably going to go in the top 40, just bullied people. It was great, and I just love the way that he is a technician who mauls, and very similar to Creed Humphrey in that regard. There's a bit of attitude there, but he's not lunging at people. He's not reckless. He's very much in control. I've been suggesting that he'd probably go to Baltimore at the end of the first round because they are desperate for offensive. I know everyone thinks the Ravens are going to take a receiver. I think guard and center is going to be the likely pick for the Ravens in the first round. And I think Myers could be a surprise pick there, but then other people grade him, firmly in the second day. So we'll see where he goes.
Yeah. See, he's a guy that I was looking at, and I'm like, you didn't bring him up. So I'm like, that tells me he's probably got the short arms, but he's a center. He can play guard. That gives him that flexibility that the Seahawks have kind of always liked on their interior. And he seems to play really smart and just, I don't know. I liked what I saw. I've only watched a little bit. I watched that semifinal game and, parts of a couple other games during the year. And I just remember liking what I saw. I need to do more tape study, but
on Myers, I've got his data now in my database. So from Spark, this is the kind of athlete we're talking about here. So he was already 6'6" and 310 in high school. So he's not like he ran this at 250 pounds and has grown at Ohio State. He was already a grown man at this point. He ran a 5.11. Now that's what a left tackle runs. A good athletic left tackle, not an Orlando Brown. A really athletic left tackle runs a 5.11, and he ran a 4.49 short shuttle. Now, to put that into perspective, when Malik McDowell ran a 4.53, 4.54 at about 290 pounds, that was one of the reasons why the Seahawks took him, because that's an incredible time. This guy just ran a 4.49 at 310 pounds. So we're talking about a really agile, really big, really athletic center who has got all of the nastiness and all of that. And I don't know his measurements. I'm guessing if he's 6'6", there's a chance he will have 33-inch arms.
Good to know. Awesome.
So let's look at the some of the skill positions. Let's start at the tight end. Just really quickly go through these. Note of interest. Currently, the Seahawks have Parkinson and Disley, and that's it right now. I think Mabry's on the practice squad. So they may be looking at upgrading the tight end position, at least maybe an inline blocker, a guy later in the rounds, or a pass catching guy, depending on how they feel about Parkinson. I think they do feel pretty good about his red zone potential, et cetera. Are there a couple of names that Seahawks fans should look out for?
Yes, it's a real shame that we don't have the combine this year, because the one test to really look for at tight ends with the Seahawks and with most of the league, in fairness, are the two agility tests. So it's the short shuttle and the three cone. There is real evidence there. If you look at the Rob Gronkowski's, Hunter Henry's, T.J. Hawkinson's, Travis Kelce's, Zach Ertz's over the years, all do very well in the three cone or the short shuttle. Good three cone, 7.10 or lower is basically anything you're looking for a tight end. And for the short shuttle, 4.4s, anything lower than that, really, really good. So and the Seahawks have consistently drafted tight ends who do really well in the short shuttle. So there are 4 guys that I've identified who ran good short shuttles at tight end size in high school that I think could really be on the radar, because this is what we have to go off now, because there's not going to be a combine. So you've got Trey McKitty, who was named the tight end of the week at the Senior Bowl. He's not quick. He's not going to run a very good 40. And when you see him trying to run routes, he doesn't create much separation. But he blocks very well. He has 11-inch hands. He absorbs it. He had 2 one-handed catches in Mobile, which were absolutely fantastic, outstanding. And his short shuttle, believe it or not, was a 4.13.
Wow.
At 240 something pounds. So that's a good cornerback time at 190 pounds. And he's running that at 240. So Trey McKitty, keeping it. He can block, he can catch. He just isn't quick, but he's got agility, and the Seahawks love that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's on their radar. Tommy Tremble at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
He could be a really athletic fullback, or he could be a great run blocking tight end. But his short shuttle time was a 4.20, and he jumped to 36-inch vertical. So again, he fits what the Seahawks look for. Don't be surprised if he's on their radar. Pat Freiermuth, they call him Baby Gronk. I think he's a late first round pick. Could be an early second round pick. Looks like Gronk. He's got the body control. Fantastic in the red zone. We'll be stunned if teams are not all over Freiermuth. Ran a 4.44 at 248 pounds. If you want the Seahawks to have a proper pass-catching tight end who could maybe just convert a few third downs next year, which is an important thing for the Seahawks, he would be worth an early investment. But again, they maybe just got too many other needs to go that early, whereas McKitty and Tremble maybe sort of early day 3 type options. The other player to keep an eye on, Brevin Jordan, I think, at Miami. Again, a dynamic pass-catching weapon, not much of a blocker, but maybe a little bit different to Colby Parkinson and Will Disley. He ran a 4.21 short shuttle at 250 pounds. So again, you're talking the kind of time you'd expect from a defensive back at 250 pounds. So these are the guys that I think the Seahawks will perhaps zone in on, and there's a decent quartet to target.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. I had notes written on Tommy Tremble, and I wrote Janarius Williams type of player at fullback, because, obviously he could be a weapon. Now, the Seahawks have had a few fullbacks on the roster the last 4 or 5 years. None of them have actually been effective as an actual fullback, as a weapon, somebody that could catch the ball out of the backfield, pick up some tough yards for you. It's always just been kind of one of those filler things that a lead blocker occasionally, mostly special teams. It'd be interesting to have a guy in there if they're going to spend a pick or hold a position on the roster for a fullback that mostly is special teams. It'd be nice to have a guy that had a little bit of upside there.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking they're going to use a pick on a tight end because they've got those two. kids on rookie deals, and they've got so many holes elsewhere. And if you're looking, okay, we need a third guy, someone that can come in and block occasionally, but not going to play much unless there's an injury. That to me sounds like a league minimum kind of guy. You get a vet rather than using one of your 4 draft picks on, unless they just really like a guy. So we'd see. I think that running back might be a bigger thing to concentrate on, because we know Carson's a free agent, Hyde's a free agent. DJ Dallas was interesting, but really kind of ineffective when he got more time. The rest of the running back group there is really unexciting. They need her back. Now, if they're not going to pay Carson, they're going to go spend money on a back, or spend a pick on one. Would a guy like Javonte Williams drop far enough to where he gets in play for Seattle, or is he going to go, just way too early and we should be looking at someone else?
Well, if they're able to draft Javonte Williams, I will do a dance around the room, because and I'm deadly serious with that, and I'm not kidding. Trust me, I will do a dance. I know it's unpopular to want a running back to be drafted early these days. You always run the wrath of a certain element of the fan base having a go at you, but Javonte Williams is everything that they look for in a running back. His yards after contact, he's physical, he jump cuts better than Najee Harris does, who's probably going to go earlier, and he's good in the passing game. He brings it. He was reliable, and you know what? He's used to working in a two-headed monster at UNC. So, I'd love to see you bring him in. Maybe pair him with a guy like Mike Davis, who was really good for Carolina last year, and we all know him from Seattle a couple of years ago. If he was available at a really cheap, Carlos Hyde style deal, put those two together, or put Big Chris with him if his market wasn't very good. You'd be talking about a really good, strong, physical running game, and Geronto Williams is one of those players that when you watch him for the first time, he leaves a mark and you go, yes, that is a player that I want on my football team. And I just fear that the Steelers or somebody like that in the first round are going to go, well, we quite like him as well, and they're going to snap him up. But hopefully there's a way that it happens. I'm not going to get my hopes up, though.
So let's say he goes early and the Seahawks are looking for someone middle. So I go through when I look at these, and I always start with the bigger backs and then go look at their measurables and that kind of stuff. And again, with this year, I thought the combine, it's going to be harder. But Stevenson out of Oklahoma, 5'11", 227, just big guy, lot of yards in the Big 12. Looks interesting, but tell me what I'm missing and why I see a lot of people talking about him as a day 3 guy.
The one thing he's got is good feet. So when he gets into the second level and he can make a defender miss, he can, a little shimmy and he's gone. His change of directions, very good. But you kind of just want to see a bit more for a guy his size up the gut. I mean, it's a weird thing to say in the modern NFL, but when you want to see him attacking the line and trucking somebody over, and you just don't see that aspect of him. And I kind of get the feeling that if you're bringing a guy that size on 3rd and 1 to get you, and he's not very good at that. What he is good at is 1st and 10, and if you get him a seam and a crease, and he can bounce it outside and then make somebody miss and then finish a run nicely. It's that kind of, is he a guy that can start and carry it 20 times and do what you need him to do? Or is he a guy who kind of pops in every now and again in relief? And if he comes head to head against a cornerback, he'll make a miss and get an extra 6 yards. That's the kind of player that I see when I watch him.
So basically you'd say he's redundant to Rashad Penny. And
yes, I think that's a good way of putting it, I'm afraid. And look, he was expected to be like 250 pounds at the Senior Bowl, and he rocked up at 220 something. So I don't know if he shifted weight on purpose, and maybe he's a different player now, because when I was into Jim Nagy, he was saying he's like going to be 245, 250, and then he was 227, I think. So I don't know if that's just what he was, or if he's undergone serious weight loss to get in shape for the NFL. But if he has, then he may be a completely different player now. He might be quicker, might be better for it. might be worse. I don't know.
When I watched him at the Senior Bowl, the first thing that came to mind is just lack of explosion. I just didn't see any power behind what he was trying to do, which was surprising given the size. Are there any other mid-round kind of guys, maybe not mid-round, but, from the back of the second all the way through to the fourth round that the Seahawks would look at, such as a Trey Sermon or a Kylan Hill or Khalil Herbert, maybe somebody later on like Elijah Mitchell, or maybe the running back from Oregon State that I really like, Jermar Jefferson.
Yeah, Jefferson's very interesting. It was a very good observation, by the way, on the lack of explosion, because Stevenson, he had a 29-inch vertical at spark, which is really poor. But he had a 4.30 short shuttle, which is kind of weird because he's got agility, but he doesn't have that explosive power. In terms of other running backs, I really like some of these guys as, maybe round 3 onwards. I mean, Khalil Herbert was just shot out of a cannon at times for Virginia Tech, and he's very quick, and he wasn't a slouch in his previous team, but he doesn't have the size that the Seahawks, they're very strict on what they look for. It's like 5'10", 5'11", 220 pounds-ish, give or take a few pounds or a bit of height or whatever. And they're like explosive guys, and he's quick. He's really quick. Now, I think in some schemes, he will be fantastic. I really hope he doesn't get drafted by the 49ers, because I think that he would be perfect for what they look to do and their kind of running scheme with Kyle Shanahan. I'd quite like to see the Seahawks drafting, because I think that if they were to go more in that direction, more the Rams kind of style, that he could be very, very good, because if he just he's a kind of a one cut and he's gone. And that's, that tends to work in this style, but the Seahawks kind of prefer these kind of big, physical, explosive, bulldozing kind of players. And that's not what he is. I mean, there are some other running backs that you could kind of check out. I mean, you mentioned Kylan Hill. I want to see how explosive he is. He just seems like we haven't seen him do anything for years, because he was kind of, he didn't play a lot of last season. And then, he took himself out of contention because he fell out with Mike Leach this year. And it kind of feel like, what are you all about? I don't know who you are. We've not seen enough of you. Then you've got guys like Chris Evans at Michigan. And, Chris Evans, to sort of date back a couple of years ago, was the next big thing. Everybody was like, Chris Evans, Michigan's Chris Evans. He's going to be a huge star. Everybody loved Chris Evans, huge grades from scouts. And then he had an injury, and then he was just a bit part player this year and didn't really do anything. But then Michigan didn't either. And then he's kind of just fallen off. And if you listen to Michigan fans talk about him, it's not pleasant. So, again, it's somebody that you could take a flyer on later on, but it's not the best running back class. I have to say, Trey Sermon did very well at the end of the season, didn't he? But then you just kind of think, well, he got injured in the championship game in the first 5 minutes, and why have you never quite been consistently good, as opposed to just playing in fits and starts? You've got some like Javian Hawkins, who's majorly explosive, incredibly quick. It's a 4.3 runner, but I think he's like 5'9" and 190 pounds. And then, at the top end, you've got big Najee Harris, and you've got Travis Etienne, who is very explosive, very fast. But, if you're going to take either of those two guys, you probably need to be picking very early, and then be willing to take a running back very early.
Well, I know we're going to skip over some wide receivers and such, but can we look on the defensive side here? We're running along on time. Just if you can, where do you see the Seahawks have some needs? Cornerback seems obvious, and where do you think they turn to the draft to address those needs as opposed to free agency, and why?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because again, it's going to come down to cost. And I've kind of thought for a while that there'd be a chance that maybe Richard Sherman would come back. And I know people kind of have, again, this is I keep bringing up divisive topics, like, should they trade Bobby Wagner? Should they bring Richard Sherman back? And like half the fan base are going, hell yeah. And then the other half are going, no, thank you. I think he sees Seattle as home. And I think that he's made his point. And I think that there will be a certain appeal to come back, have the come home Richard moment where everybody celebrates Richard's return, and he finishes in the place where he always really wanted to finish.
Can Jamal and Richard Sherman exist on the same roster?
Oh, I think they could. I think that
He respects playmakers.
Yeah. And I think he actually respects Pete a lot more than people realize. I just think that Richard's very headstrong and thinks he's right about everything. And I think that Pete had enough of that. and he was injured, so they decided to part. But I do think that rather than it be like Earl and the way that's gone, I think this is more like Marshawn. And Marshawn came back, and when Marshawn left in the final game, that's probably going to be Marshawn's final game in his career, he was in the locker room and he delivered a speech to the whole team and said, "Don't ever take this place for granted." And I thought, wow, it's incredible, and it kind of showed how he'd gone to play in Oakland, and it had made it even his home, Oakland, and he came back and he said those words. And I think Richard is of the same mind, and I actually think that Richard would probably take less to play in Seattle than he would to play in Detroit, for example, or somewhere like that. I think that this is where he wants to finish. And I think there may be a deal to be done there to bring him back for 1 year at a relatively decent cost that suits both team and player, in order for Seahawks to fill that hole and help train up maybe a younger undrafted free agent or late round pick. And there are some guys in this draft that they could do that, later on. There's a lot of 32-inch arm cornerbacks in this draft, and there's some talented ones as well, some good ones at the Senior Bowl. So that's what I think for corner. I think for defensive line, you always need to add to your defensive line. I think it's the same with the O-line. You've got to keep replenishing the stock there, and you've got to keep trying to find those studs. I don't think you should rest on your laurels just because Carlos Dunlap came in and had a bit of an impact there. I mean, Carlos is 32, isn't he? So, and we don't know what we're going to get from Darrell Taylor. So I think if you could find another edge later on who's got the upside, and there are a couple of guys in this draft class who, one of them, I'm going to do a terrible job of pronouncing his name, Adetokunbo Ogundeji from Notre Dame, 256 pounds, 6'4.5", 35.25-inch arms, 85.5-inch wingspan, 7 TFLs, I think it was last year, 7 sacks in a shortened season, ran a 4.21 short shuttle. This is the kind of numbers that you look for a Seahawks edge, and he's going to be available a bit later on. So worth taking a punt there. Janarius Robinson at Florida State was all over the place in drills, but has got a most remarkable wingspan and an arm length, and he ran a 4.27 in terms of short shuttle as well. So you've got a couple of options there, and then at linebacker, just to finally sort of wrap it up there, they love great athletes. It's all about athleticism for the Seahawks. And again, it's a short shuttle. If you run a great short shuttle, you would generally get drafted by the Seahawks. Cody Barton, Ben Burke-Irvin, they both ran superb short shuttles. Kevin Pierre-Louis, people like that. Nick Ballore, funnily enough, ran a great short shuttle. I know he's not playing linebacker, but for Seattle, he's moved to fullback, but ran a 4.00 short shuttle, believe it or not. But there's a couple of guys in this draft that they could look at. Baron Browning at Ohio State, amazing athlete. I think he's going to go very early, though. KJ Britt at Auburn, played it like his hair was on fire in the game. Was named the linebacker of the week at the Senior Bowl. Very intense, very physical, raved about in terms of work ethic, if I put my teeth in, at Auburn. And he ran a 4.22 short shuttle and jumps to 35-inch vertical. So, he's got the athleticism, he's got the attitude. If they needed to bring in somebody because they can't sign one KJ, they could potentially go and draft another KJ in KJ Britt.
Nice.
Awesome. Okay, one player I want to get, I just want to get an opinion of, because he's, as far as scheme fit for Seattle, he's one of those guys that I think fits Seattle really well, but not most teams, because they run that cover 3 all the time. And that would be Miles Jones out of Texas A&M. Guy's 6'4", 185 at cornerback. And I just see him being a tremendous outside, cover the third of the field, not get beat deep, have all that length, and just, be Byron Maxwell on the outside there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. I think that, when you talk about the size there, and it's always, when you actually look at this is the other reason the combine's so great, because when the safeties work out and you see some of these like longer guys, and it was with Trey Flowers. I remember watching the combine live, and I do a live blog during the combine usually, And we wrote straight away, that's Seahawks cornerback. He's not a safety, because he was just so long and lean. And, you know, when you get these guys coming up and you think, well, they did a certain role, they did this at, you know, at a certain college, and even the ones who play cornerback, who play a certain style, you think that's a Seahawks defensive back one way or another. You could see them tapping into that. I definitely see where you're coming from with him. That's a definite candidate. And, you know, it's weird. They haven't drafted many corners over the years, or even players that moved to corner. I mean, their only one in recent history is Trey Flowers, and he was a safety. So I think they're long overdue to sort of tap back into that and bring in a developmental guy.
I think, you know, any Husky fans out there may want to know where Keith Taylor Jr. might go in the draft and what you think about him. He looked really smooth, really able to stay in phase at the Senior Bowl. I was impressed. Would the Seahawks consider somebody like that if you were to hang around, maybe with their second pick overall, or if they drop back with their second round pick and picked up a couple of additional picks?
I think he's very much sort of in that third round range off the back of the Senior Bowl, because he was arguably the most impressive cornerback of the week, and very physical, very tight in coverage. You know, a lot of the cornerbacks had, you know, some good snaps, and then they'd just get completely owned by a receiver and have a really, and he really avoided that. He never had that sort of really awful rep. The problem from a Seahawks perspective is the old length issue. He has 31-inch arms. Now, the thing we have to remember is DJ Reed's come in and started and had a really good spell as a starter, and, you know, you would earmark him as a starter going into 2021. And Pete was asked about whether he maybe changed his mind about the whole 32-inch arms thing in one of his press conferences, and he said, "Yeah, you know, maybe he admitted, maybe I will be more open-minded about this." So I wouldn't rule it out completely, whereas in the past I would have done. I really like him, and I think he plays with the mentality that you want from a Seahawks cornerback. It's just whether or not the arm length is going to, because, you know, Pete can say one thing in December, can't he? And then when it gets to April and he's actually on the clock, he may well think another thing. So we'll see.
Well, DJ Reed was definitely great despite the lack of length, but so was Justin Coleman, you know, the slot cornerback from a few years ago that they've kind of missed since he left until DJ Reed and Amadi this year. So, yeah, I mean, they've been able to find guys like that, but at some point, can they just draft someone? I mean, they haven't other than Flowers, who was a project because he was a safety, who had to start because the, you know, two guys in front of him both got hurt in camp, but they haven't drafted a corner. It's been a while, and they need to. It would be nice. I mean, Shaq Griffin was the last one, and, you know, he's probably gone in free agency because he's going to cost too much. So at some point they need to draft someone, and if they bring Sherman back, I'm all for it. I think it would be great, assuming that he has his head where it needs to be between him and Pete and all of that. But draft someone to play, you know, to develop under him and to be ready to take over, because Sherman's having a hard time staying healthy. He's getting older. You need another body.
I think they're going to take a look at like a Robert Rochelle in like round 5, maybe slightly earlier than he might go, just because he needs a little bit more time, a little bit more development. But he ran a 4.38 40, got a 41-inch vertical and 11.6 broad jump with a 3.98 short shuttle. 10 interceptions, 38 pass breakups in 4 years. So he's got the production. 6'1", 195. He just, you know, he played for Central Arkansas, so he's going to need to kind of test that against some premier guys, and somebody like that, you know, come in with some upside later on. It's just, it's interesting that, you know, we just don't have a lot of picks, so they're going to have to be very strategic as far as how they approach this. I think Keith and I had talked a couple of podcasts ago about maybe the Seahawks would come out of this draft with 7 picks. I just don't know how they're going to do that. You know, they're either going to have to take that, the only draft capital they really have is that second round pick, and trade back to pick up additional picks with that. And it's going to take them out of some quality talent there, and kind of leverage the draft into kind of a where nobody's special, but you have a lot of players that are just filling holes. which is tough to do, not only for the team itself, but for fans to be able to watch and see guys flying off the board. It's tough. Anywho, Rob, I think that we've gone over a little bit on this thing. We want to thank you.
Way over.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, talk about all the stuff that we talked about early on in the show, and then end it with all of the knowledge that you have on the prospects, different fits that they might have in the Seahawks organization and the scheme. And it's just been a pleasure. So I want to say thank you very much.
Oh no, the pleasure's all mine. Any opportunity to talk Seahawks, I snatch it up. So it's been a pleasure.
So yeah, it's been great having you. Can we have you back, like maybe right after the draft? We'll talk about how the draft went down and what the Seahawks did, and get your take on some of it. Because by then we'll have a lot of experts out there saying stuff, and it's always nice to have someone who really knows the Seahawks. And not just, the national view of things to break stuff down.
Anytime, literally anytime you want us on, just drop me a DM and I'll do it. No problem.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Let's get out of here. So you can find Rob on Twitter. Where are you at, Rob?
Yeah. So at Rob Staton, and spelled as my name is on Twitter, and please check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com. And if you go onto YouTube and type in Rob Staton as well, you'll find my channel, and that's where all of the prospect interviews I'm doing will be found, and the podcast I do. So please check it out.
And all of it is excellent. And thank you for contributing to the Seahawks family of contributors out there that they're doing the blogs, and you're just doing it out of the passion, and you can really tell that you're passionate about it. Even if people don't agree with some of the takes, they agree with the passion and the knowledge that you bring to what you're talking about. So that's awesome.
No, thanks guys. I appreciate that. And I hope people do appreciate that it is just a passion, and let's be nice to each other.
Amen. All right.
Agreed.
Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. The show's at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of the shows archived. You can find us on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube as well. And until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.